There is a silent, almost imperceptible moment when all of reality seems to hold its breath. It is the moment when two truly awakened beings recognize each other. It is not an ordinary encounter, not a romantic gesture, not a poetic accident. It is as if the universe behind all its masks finally admits to itself, I have found myself once again. This moment has such a profound force that it dismantles all the superficial images we create about love, connection, and destiny. And if you are attentive, you will realize that there is something unsettling there, something that challenges everything we believe about the need to be completed by someone. Alan Watts said that the world lives through us, not around us. We are momentary expressions of a larger process, temporary waves of the same eternal ocean. But most people spend their entire lives believing they are incomplete, that something is missing, that the missing half is in someone else, in another body, in another voice, waiting to fill an inner space that always seems to escape. This belief creates a kind of emotional hunger that shapes how we approach others. We approach with expectation, with desire, with neediness, with fear. We approach like someone arriving at a dry well hoping to find water. We believe that the other person has what we cannot find in ourselves. But that's precisely where the first misunderstanding arises. Because this desperate search isn't love, it's a plea for relief, a silent request for someone to carry the weight we don't want to or don't know how to face. Alan Watts described this movement as a confused dance between illusions, two people approaching each other not because they see each other, but because they expect the other to resolve what they avoid looking at within themselves. It's as if two weary travelers lean on each other without realizing that both are too exhausted to bear any weight. The encounter seems intense, seems beautiful, seems inevitable, but all of this stems from lack, not from fullness. And anything that begins like this carries within it the seed of exhaustion. Perhaps you recognize yourself in this. Perhaps you've already felt that shiver of need, that feeling that without someone specific you can't go on. This feeling is so common that it has become culturally celebrated. We call it passion, soulmate, crossed destiny. We create stories to justify the neediness. But what if all this is just an elegant disguise for the fear of being alone? What if the idea of incompleteness is just an illusion maintained by the ego, which fears disappearing if it doesn't have something external to cling to? What if what we call love is often just a contract for emotional survival? Alan Watts would pose a simple question. Who would you be if you realized you lacked nothing? If you discovered that what you seek in another already silently exists within you? This question shakes deep structures because it challenges the way we have been conditioned to relate. It pulls the rug out from under us. It exposes the emptiness. It shows that perhaps we have never truly loved, only tried to fill internal voids with external presences. And it is precisely this revelation that opens the way to understanding what happens when two awakened souls meet. The curious thing is that this encounter doesn't resemble anything culture teaches. There's no urgency. There's none of that emotional turmoil we call chemistry. There are no desperate attempts to hold on, convince, conquer, or impress. There's a strange clarity, a feeling of familiarity so profound it's almost disconcerting. It's like looking at someone and effortlessly realizing you don't need to ask for anything. You don't need to demand anything. You don't need to mold anything. The other person doesn't come to complete you, but to mirror you. They don't come to save you, but to reveal you. They don't come to fill a void, but to expand your perception. Alan Watts said that when the ego stops seeking security in the other, the bond ceases to be a contract and becomes a revelation. The person no longer appears as a promise of healing, but as a silent confirmation that you are already whole. This change of perspective completely transforms the quality of the encounter. There is no longer tension in the approach. There is no longer fear in the gaze. There is no longer a dispute between hidden needs. The recognition is direct, naked, clear. It is consciousness recognizing consciousness, even if the bodies and histories are different. And here's an intriguing point. This kind of encounter doesn't arise from effort. It happens in the same way the sun rises, naturally, inevitably, without needing to be forced. Watts described it as an inner alignment, as if two people had finally stopped searching for each other in the shadows, and in doing so, became visible to one another. The encounter is not a solution, It's a consequence. It's not a romantic miracle. It's a reflection of clarity. What's most striking is that when two awakened souls see each other in this way, something in the atmosphere changes. There's a different kind of stillness, a calm that doesn't paralyze, but expands. A feeling that this instant contains much more than it appears to. It's almost as if every detail were a kind of ancient memory, as if they had already walked towards each other many times, in different lives, different forms, different stories, not as a predetermined destiny, but as an inevitable recognition between two consciousnesses that have finally stopped believing they were broken. This raises one last question, perhaps the most provocative of all. What happens when two people who don't need each other choose to walk side by side? What manifests when the encounter is born not from hunger, but from fulfillment? This is the door that opens now, and crossing it requires a complete change in how we understand what it truly means to relate. There comes a point in life when, without realizing it, you begin to observe the people around you differently, not because you've become colder or more selective, but because something inside you has finally grown tired of the old narratives. You realize that many human encounters are built upon invisible expectations, like tiny threads pulling at every gesture, every word, every silence. Threads that say, complete me, prove something to me, make me feel safe. And as this perception expands, it becomes difficult to see any relationship in the same way. It's as if you've peeled back a film from your eyes and begun to see the structure behind the theater. Alan Watts said that much of the pain in relationships stems precisely from this involuntary effort to transform the other person into an emotional guarantee. And when this effort falters, even for a moment, something completely new begins to emerge. Imagine, for example, a seemingly simple conversation with someone you've just met. No declarations, no hidden intentions, no games. Just two people talking about life, without trying to fit into a mold, without forcing sympathy, without measuring each sentence. One moment you comment on something banal, like the smell of rain. The next, the silence between you becomes so comfortable that it feels weighty. There is no tension, no searching, no attempt to impress. There is only presence, that tranquil presence that we rarely find and that, when it arises, causes a kind of internal surprise. Why is this so easy? It is in these kinds of moments that the difference between wanting and needing is revealed for the first time. Watts described this as liberation from conditioning. The encounter doesn't revolve around the fear of absence, but the curiosity about presence. A natural, almost childlike curiosity, like when children approach each other without expectations, moved only by genuine interest. And it's curious to realize how this simplicity is frightening. Many people recoil from true tranquility because they don't know what to do when the game disappears. Silence strips them bare, and most are not prepared to be truly seen. But an awakened soul reacts differently. It doesn't hide. It relaxes. Watson said that true freedom begins when we stop trying to manage our own image, and that's exactly what happens in these rare encounters. Nobody is acting. Nobody is adjusting their tone of voice to seem more interesting. Nobody is organizing their speech to seem wiser. There is only authenticity, and this authenticity creates a beauty that no emotional makeup can reproduce. Now imagine a deeper scenario. You meet someone at a random moment of the day, perhaps at your usual cafe or in a supermarket queue, and the conversation begins by chance. What should last seconds turns into minutes, then an hour. Time passes strangely, as if you were suspended outside of the clock. This person doesn't provoke anxiety, doesn't unsettle you, doesn't pressure you. They remind you of something you didn't know you had forgotten, that presence can be light. And at the same time, there's a silent intensity there, a kind of inexplicable magnetism. You realize, almost with astonishment, that you're not expecting anything from this person, and yet you want to stay there. Watts argued that when the ego quiets down, the encounter ceases to be a transaction and becomes a discovery. And in this kind of discovery, each word becomes clearer, each gesture becomes more natural, each look carries a recognition that transcends logic. It's as if you were standing before someone who, effortlessly, reminds you of who you are when you're not trying to be anything. There's no feeling of loss of control, but a feeling of liberation. You're not being analyzed, measured, or projected, just seen. And the most unexpected thing is that, paradoxically, this lightness reveals a greater depth than any passion built on expectations. The passion of neediness screams, the awakened connection whispers, but its impact is much stronger. It doesn't impose itself. It happens. And when it happens, it leaves marks as subtle as they are definitive. You go home thinking about the conversation, not because you need it, but because something there opened up space within you. And when that space opens, it rarely closes again. There's also an element of mystery surrounding these encounters. Sometimes you feel like you've known that person before, even without ever having seen them. Other times, the simple way they pronounce a phrase awakens a memory you didn't even know you carried. Watts said that the feeling of profound recognition is not coincidence, it's synchronicity. It's the universe making two seemingly distant paths touch for an instant, just enough for both to realize that life has its own intelligence, far beyond human planning. And perhaps the most surprising thing is how you realize that nothing needs to be forced. If the encounter continues, it will continue. If it ends there, it will still leave something transformed. This scares some people because we are used to believing that we need to fight for everything that matters. But when two awakened souls meet, there is no struggle. There is permission, there is openness, there is choice. And here arises a question that begins to germinate even before you fully realize it. What happens when two people who don't need to cling to each other choose to remain close? What kind of bond is born when no one is demanding anything, when no one is trying to mold anything, when no one is afraid of losing the other? This question lingers, creating a gentle, almost magnetic tension that inevitably leads us to the next step in this journey. There's something profoundly disconcerting about realizing that most of the drama plaguing relationships doesn't stem from love, but from the ego's relentless attempt to protect itself. It's like watching a play where everyone improvises roles they never consciously chose. The fights for attention, the sudden jealousy, the distorted interpretations of silence, the heated internal dialogues before any real conversation. All of this seems so natural that almost no one questions it. But when you begin to observe yourself honestly, you realize that much of the suffering is merely a reflection of a fragile identity trying to remain whole. And that's precisely why the encounter between two awakened souls is so different. There's no longer a need to act. The stage dissolves. This lack of pretense is surprising because it dismantles unspoken expectations. Instead of tension, there is openness. Instead of demands, there is clarity. Instead of vigilance, there is rest. It's a type of connection that doesn't depend on constant reinforcement, because it doesn't stem from a fantasy of possession. The curious thing is that this lightness doesn't reduce the intensity. On the contrary, it amplifies it. When neither party is trying to control the narrative, the relationship becomes a living space where every gesture has authenticity and every word has weight. Communication doesn't need to be flawless to be profound. But here comes the first breaking point. What if the absence of drama is precisely what frightens us most? Many people have learned to confuse intensity with turbulence. Without artificial highs and lows, some believe there is no passion. Have we been conditioned to love noise because we fear silence? It is in this silent zone that human behavior reveals nuances that rarely appear in ordinary relationships. When there is no struggle for control, small traces of sincerity emerge effortlessly. An awakened person can admit fear without feeling humiliated. They can reveal fragility without expecting compensation. They can expose their own confusion without demanding that the other person fix anything. This creates such an unusual atmosphere that, for many, it seems almost unreal. It's as if we are too accustomed to protecting our own boundaries to understand the beauty of someone who is not trying to cross them. And there is yet another curious phenomenon. In relationships based on neediness, jealousy functions as a hidden engine that keeps the bond alive. But among awakened souls, jealousy loses its dramatic function. It may arise, yes, as a human reflex, but it quickly disappears because it finds no fertile ground to grow. The awakened person realizes that jealousy says nothing about the other person, but everything about their own momentary insecurity. And upon recognizing this, the emotion dissolves with the same naturalness with which it appeared. This raises another uncomfortable question. If jealousy no longer serves as a measure of importance, what becomes the true indicator of depth between two people? The answer appears in everyday life. When two awakened souls coexist, intimacy takes on a discreet yet powerful tone. There are no attempts to impress. There are no comparisons. There is no yearning for validation. Small actions gain grandeur. A cup of tea offered without haste. A look that listens before responding. A pause where silence doesn't feel awkward. Intimacy becomes a form of presence that doesn't demand. It simply exists. This is so unusual that for those who have never experienced something like it, it may seem that emotion is lacking. But the emotions are there. They are just not noisy. What's surprising is that this calmness doesn't eliminate the passion. It intensifies it in a different way. Instead of high tension, there's depth. Instead of explosions, there are revelations. Instead of endless conflicts, there are dialogues that truly transform. The relationship ceases to be a battlefield and becomes an internal laboratory. It's as if each encounter is a silent investigation into who you are when you're not trying to prove anything. And then an unexpected reflection arises. Has true love always been like this? And have we simply mistaken it for noise for so long that we've forgotten its original form? What's most intriguing is that two awakened souls don't try to mold each other. They don't want to correct the other. They don't try to smooth out rough edges that deep down only bother the ego. Instead, they recognize that the other person is a territory that will never be fully understood. And this doesn't generate anxiety but fascination. It's like watching a sunset knowing you can never fully capture it. The beauty lies precisely in the mystery. This unconditional acceptance creates a kind of emotional freedom almost impossible to explain in words. This freedom also brings an unexpected consequence. The absence of possession eliminates the need for surveillance. When you know that no one belongs to anyone, and that the connection doesn't depend on chains, the relationship breathes. Individual spaces cease to be threats and become a natural part of the flow. No presence is required, but each return is chosen. This transforms each reunion into renewal, not repetition. And then an inevitable question arises. What happens when two people who don't try to measure, control, or possess each other end up choosing each other repeatedly, without any external pressure? The answer begins to manifest itself in the finest layers of coexistence. The relationship becomes a mirror that doesn't distort. It shows both its light and its shadows, but without violence. There is no humiliation, only awareness. There is no demand, only clarity. There is no fear, only transparency. It is an experience that dismantles any previous fantasy of love based on need and places you before something you never imagined could exist, a bond where freedom does not threaten security and where truth does not threaten affection. And it is precisely at this point that the story opens up to a new level, revealing that the intimacy between awakened souls carries a power that surpasses everything most people understand as a relationship. What is born from this is unlike anything we have experienced before. It is something deeper, more silent, and, in a way, more dangerous, because it transforms everything it touches. There is a type of communication that cannot be learned from books, training sessions, or etiquette manuals. It appears unexpectedly when two people who are not trapped behind their own masks begin to interact. It is a communication that does not depend on elaborate speeches, but on a silent harmony that permeates even the simplest gestures. Often it appears in such discreet moments that no one around notices, but those within the experience feel something almost impossible to explain. It's as if the conversation happens on two levels simultaneously, what is said in words and what is transmitted in the space between them. This second level is what truly matters. There are curious accounts of people who, upon interacting with someone who had awakened to this inner clarity, noticed that the conversations took on a different quality. One woman recounted talking for hours with a stranger on a train, without either of them needing to ask anything personal. They spoke about small details of daily life, but each sentence seemed to open inner doors. She said it wasn't the depth of the topics that impressed her, but the way the silence between sentences seemed to rest naturally, without weight. When she got off at the final station, she had the inexplicable feeling that she had spoken to someone who knew her even before meeting her. These improbable encounters, which arise in mundane places, often have a greater impact than carefully planned connections. There are also situations that transcend common logic. Once a man recounted meeting someone in a cafe with whom he had never exchanged a word. Yet, in that single instant when their eyes met, they both smiled as if recognizing something beyond the reach of rational explanation. Neither of them returned to that place by coincidence. It was as if the encounter had served a purpose that didn't need to be repeated. This type of experience, as improbable as it is familiar, usually happens when communication isn't driven by the need to make an impression. It springs from naturalness, from an encounter that forces nothing, and for that very reason, touches us more deeply. The strangest thing is that when two awakened souls converse, they can disagree without generating conflict. There is no urgency to prove a point or win an argument. The conversation transforms into a kind of mental dance. Each thought is explored, not defended. Each opinion is an open door, not a trench. This lightness creates an interesting phenomenon. The conversations don't become predictable. They change direction without warning, jumping from profound themes to simple observations, returning to essential questions without seeming chaotic. It's as if both were following the same invisible thread, a thread that leads not to conclusion, but to expansion. A curious fact is that social psychology researchers have observed that when two people achieve deep rapport, their facial microexpressions begin to synchronize involuntarily. It's something so subtle that it cannot be imitated through conscious effort. Two individuals conversing from a place of close contact begin to adopt similar breathing rhythms, similar pauses, and a natural cadence, without realizing it. This phenomenon has been catalogued, but is not yet fully understood, as it is not automatic imitation. It is a spontaneous alignment that only occurs when there is no internal resistance. This type of communication also removes the emotional weight that usually accompanies difficult conversations. In ordinary relationships, any disagreement can become a threat to the bond. Between awakened souls, conflict is not seen as a risk, but as an opportunity for clarity. Surprising to see how this transforms the atmosphere. Instead of tension, curiosity arises. Instead of fear, transparency emerges. It's as if both understand that the conversation is not a battle, but a field of joint investigation. And this creates a rare feeling that neither of them needs to defend themselves against anything. Even humor takes on a different form. It's not humor that tries to alleviate discomfort, nor humor that seeks attention. It's spontaneous, almost childlike humor that arises from the mutual recognition of the absurdity of existence. Laughter appears amidst serious discussions, not out of disrespect, but because both perceive the invisible lightness that sustains everything. It's common for those around not to understand the reason for the laughter, because what is being perceived is not literal. It's a shared vision of the unpredictable and mysterious nature of life. Physical intimacy, when it arises, follows the same logic. There is no anxiety, because no one is trying to prove anything. There is no comparison, because there is no competition. There is no tension, because the encounter is not motivated by the fear of losing, but by the curiosity to explore. It is an experience reminiscent of accounts from people who have experienced altered states of consciousness. Everything seems simultaneously clearer and lighter. The body is not used as a shield or as an object. It is simply another means by which presence expresses itself. Some research involving couples who meditated together daily revealed unexpected results. When both reached states of deep presence, the feeling of separation diminished, and many described the experience as two bodies, one mind observing. It's not that they literally became one, but the psychological boundary separating them seemed to temporarily disappear. This scientific observation, though limited, suggests that the subjective experience of union between awakened souls may have more tangible foundations than we imagine. And perhaps most intriguing of all, this level of communication doesn't require constant proximity. Two awakened souls can go for long periods without contact and still resume a conversation as if the pause never happened. There is no resentment over distance because there is no rigid expectation of presence. The bond is sustained not by shared time, but by the quality of attention each offers when the encounter occurs. This form of interaction challenges everything we have been culturally conditioned to believe about relationships, and that is precisely why it prepares the ground for an even deeper phenomenon, something that only begins to reveal itself when the bond ceases to be merely communication and begins to influence the internal reality of each person. This transformation marks the beginning of the next movement in this journey. There's a point in the relationship between two awakened souls where everything seems so natural, so fluid, so unpretentious, that one almost believes nothing could shake this harmony. However, it is precisely in this space of clarity that the greatest transformations begin to emerge. When there are no masks, every movement becomes visible, every emotion becomes clear, every inner shadow loses the chance to hide. This creates a kind of transparency that cannot be faked. And when this transparency takes hold, the relationship enters a territory that many would avoid if they knew the intensity it carries. This territory reveals itself slowly, almost stealthily. One day you realize that what previously went unnoticed now gains strength. An innocent comment, which in any other relationship would have generated conflict or misunderstanding, here becomes an unexpected opportunity to see old patterns. But what makes this experience so profound is that there is no room for stubbornness. Two awakened souls don't try to win the argument, but end up confronting truths they would prefer to postpone. It is at this point that coexistence ceases to be merely lighthearted and begins to touch inner regions that have never truly received attention. And it's curious how this happens. Sometimes tension arises in small, almost banal situations, a silence that lingers beyond what's comfortable, a word that seems too short, an absence that appears at a moment when you least expect to think about the other person's presence. These small fissures bring old emotions to the surface, and it's at this instant that an important turning point occurs. You expect to feel fear, but you don't. You expect to feel abandonment, but you don't. Instead, you feel a different movement, something rarer, sincerity. It is precisely at this moment that the first major turning point occurs. You discover that the bond doesn't need the absence of conflict to be solid. On the contrary, it is in moments of tension that the relationship reveals its true strength. There are no explosions. There are no shouts. There is no blame being thrown back and forth. What exists is the willingness to look at the discomfort without running away. And this creates a level of intimacy so real that it's almost frightening. After all, few people are prepared to be seen precisely when they don't feel in control. This willingness to remain whole in the presence of the other brings an unexpected consequence. You discover that you can be completely honest without hurting. You can admit vulnerability without losing dignity. You can confess fear without compromising trust. It's a kind of emotional freedom that challenges everything we've learned in ordinary relationships. Instead of pushing away, it brings closer. Instead of destroying, it strengthens. And just when you believe you've understood this new form of connection, something even more surprising happens. The second twist comes when you realize that, between awakened souls, distance doesn't carry the same weight. In traditional relationships, distance often causes insecurity. Here, absence is simply a natural movement, like night following day. The relationship doesn't depend on constant proximity. It's sustained by the depth of what has already been seen, not by the frequency of contact. This can confuse outsiders because it seems contradictory. The more freedom there is, the stronger the bond becomes. But it is precisely this freedom that prevents the emergence of fear. And where there is no fear, there is no need for control. And this is where the rhythm of the relationship accelerates unpredictably. One day you're together talking as if the world were on pause. The next, each of you is on your own path, moving forward in personal processes that don't need explaining. Even so, the connection remains intact. There's a silent, almost instinctive trust that nothing is being lost. Deep down, there's an understanding that what is true doesn't require continuous presence to continue existing. This movement creates a different kind of tension, not destructive, but expansive. You wonder how something so free can be so stable. And when you try to analyze it, you realize that the strength lies in the choice. Two awakened souls don't stay together out of fear of separation. They remain because they want to, because it's natural, because each reunion brings something new. It's as if the relationship has its own internal rhythm, something similar to the pulse of life. Something that doesn't need to be controlled because it's already functioning exactly as it should. And it is precisely at this point that the third major turning point emerges. When one person's individual growth begins to intensify, the other feels no threat. On the contrary, they feel admiration. The relationship doesn't limit, doesn't pull down, doesn't hold back. It propels. Each internal movement of transformation in one echoes in the other, creating a cycle of expansion that would hardly occur outside of this type of bond. It's no exaggeration to say that, for some people, this is the moment when they realize that the spiritual, emotional, and energetic connection between two awakened souls has a direct impact on personal development. The relationship transforms into something like a living mirror that not only reflects but activates profound changes. But this point also carries its own risk, and that's where the tension grows. Freedom and mutual growth can lead to very different paths. And as that moment approaches, two questions silently arise. Will we continue walking together? Will this expansion keep us side by side or lead us in different directions? These questions don't create fear, but they create expectation. The relationship reaches a state where every future choice seems to open unknown doors. It's like standing before an immense horizon, knowing that any decision will be profound. And it is here that the narrative prepares to enter its final stage. The relationship between two awakened souls reaches its limit where everything becomes possible. To remain, to separate, to transform, to transcend. There is no guarantee, no promise, no contract. There is only the inevitable expansion of two consciousnesses that have finally understood that love is not imprisonment, but movement. And it is precisely this movement that leads to the last chapter of this journey. The conclusion awaits. There are moments in life when we realize that nothing we seek outside has truly fulfilled us, and yet we continue to cling to the illusion that something external can resolve what we feel inside. But when you carefully observe everything we've covered so far, it becomes impossible to deny what is most evident. The quality of your relationships will never be greater than the quality of your presence. This is the final key, and perhaps the most transformative. Two awakened souls don't connect because they are lucky, destined, or have special chemistry. They connect because they have learned to be whole in their own silence, and it is this wholeness that changes everything. The truth is that no one awakens by accident, and no one builds this kind of deep bond without first confronting their own inner labyrinths. The most striking thing about this type of encounter is that it reveals something that often goes unnoticed. The world reacts to your inner state more faithfully than you imagine. When you carry tension, you attract tension. When you carry fear, you attract relationships that mirror that fear. But when you maintain clarity, honesty, and peace, everything around you begins to reorganize. Not because the universe is conspiring in your favor, but because you have stopped conspiring against yourself. The other person ceases to be a crutch and becomes a partner in expansion. And this doesn't happen in an abstract or distant way. It happens in the details of everyday life, in the way you respond to criticism, in how you deal with anxiety, in the care you take of your boundaries, and in respecting the silence of others. It's impossible to experience a conscious encounter if you're still living based on automatic reactions. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming conscious. A conscious relationship begins when you recognize that you no longer need to fight to be right. You don't need to prove your worth, and you don't need to demand guarantees to trust. This inner shift opens up space for something few people experience, a bond where there is no threat. Because where there is no fear, there is no control. And where there is no control, there is freedom. This freedom is the ground where real love grows. Not a romantic love, inflated with expectations, but a love that allows each person to be exactly who they are, without reducing the other to a role. The most curious thing is that this type of relationship doesn't depend on a specific person. It depends on who you become. And here, the crucial question arises: how to take the first step towards experiencing something like this? The answer is simpler than it seems, but it requires courage. The first step is learning to observe yourself. Before seeking someone who sees you, learn to see yourself. Before expecting understanding, learn to understand yourself. Before wanting sincerity from others, learn to be sincere with yourself. The practice begins with how you process your own discomfort. Instead of running away, stop, feel, understand. Ask yourself what you are trying to avoid. This small gesture, repeated many times, changes everything, because it brings you closer to who you really are, not to what you have learned to perform. The second step is cultivating inner silence. Not an empty silence, but an attentive silence. This can be achieved through meditation, breathing, or simply learning to pause before reacting. When you create space within yourself, you become capable of truly listening to the other person without anticipating responses, listening to yourself without distorting everything with judgments. This type of listening is rare, but it transforms any bond. Many people have never truly been heard in their lives, and when you listen to someone in this way, you inevitably awaken something within the other person. Communication changes, presence changes, the relationship changes. The third step is accepting that no relationship needs to last forever to be true. Clinging to permanence is one of the greatest sources of suffering. When you allow life to follow its natural flow, connections become more vibrant. There is no pressure, no desperation, no constant fear of loss. Each moment becomes a complete encounter, not an attempt to hold on to what cannot be controlled. This doesn't weaken the relationship. On the contrary, it strengthens it. Because everything that remains is what is free, and everything that is free chooses to stay. This is how two awakened souls meet, not because they need to, but because they are ready, not because they seek each other, but because they see each other, not because they complete each other, but because they recognize each other. When this recognition happens, the world around them seems to slow down. Conversations gain depth, silences gain meaning. Conflicts become doors, not prisons. Boundaries become language, not separation. And the relationship, instead of a battle of egos, transforms into a field where each grows alongside the other, and not at the expense of the other. If you wish to experience something like this, begin from within. Begin now. Observe what hurts you, observe what irritates you, observe what holds you back. Each emotion is a path that leads to yourself. The more you understand yourself, the more you liberate yourself. And the more liberated you are, the more prepared you become to meet someone who has also walked the same path. An encounter between two awakened souls doesn't begin when you look at each other. It begins much earlier, in the silence of your own journey. And now that you've made it this far, I invite you to continue this process. If this video resonated with you, if any part touched you in a way you couldn't quite name, please give it a like. If you want to comment but prefer to remain anonymous, comment as you wish. And if you feel that this type of content can transform your perspective on the world, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here keeps this journey going.